Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Well, Pastor Coates sadly is going to be staying in the Edmonton Remand Center for the next 8 weeks. We are contemplating an appeal to the Alberta Court of Appeal, so there's still a possibility if we proceed with that, and if we're successful, we would like to get him out of jail sooner. So that's under consideration right now. Otherwise, this is a pastor who's been in jail since February the 16th, already more than 2 weeks, and now for another 8 weeks in jail for not being willing to comply with unscientific and unconstitutional health orders, in respect to which the Alberta government has put forward no evidence that the health orders are serving the interests of public safety.
We have John Carpay, so I'm going to come back to the Super Chats later. Hey, John, I see you crystal clear via Skype. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate that. You're in Alberta right now. We introduced you already, President of the Justice Center. You're the lawyer. Your firm, your public interest law firm, Charity, works for James Coates. Can you give me an update? We were just talking to Sheila, who was on the calls yesterday and today, but is there any news you have for us today?
Well, Pastor Coates sadly is going to be staying in the Edmonton Remand Center for the next 8 weeks. We are contemplating an appeal to the Alberta Court of Appeal, so there's still a possibility if we proceed with that, and if we're successful, we would like to get him out of jail sooner. So that's under consideration right now. Otherwise, this is a pastor who's been in jail since February the 16th, already more than 2 weeks, and now for another 8 weeks in jail for not being willing to comply with unscientific and unconstitutional health orders, in respect to which the Alberta government has put forward no evidence that the health orders are serving the interests of public safety. This is an assumption that the judge was operating on this morning, and I'm not making the claim that he was incorrect in law, but certainly very sad when you've got governments that are not providing science or evidence to back up these health orders, and they're engaging in fear-mongering, and then now we've got a pastor in jail for not being in full compliance with the unconstitutional health orders.
All right, I got a few questions for you. I'm going to try and run through them. I know your time is limited. You have a lot of things to do today. He's still at the Edmonton Remand Center. I think we have some visuals of that. It's a maximum security facility, typically used when violent criminals are arrested and they're held before bail. It's also a longer-term facility, but the visuals I've seen of it, I was in the old remand center as a lawyer once. I haven't been in the new remand center, but it visually reminds me of another maximum security prison I was in. It is a terrible place to be in. You're with murderers, drug dealers, rapists. Is it your understanding that Pastor Coates will remain in this horrible facility for the next 8 weeks?
That's my understanding, yes. And
in maximum security. I've never heard of such a thing before. Like there's surely minimum security. Heck, put him in one of these quarantine hotels that Trudeau has set up. I've never heard of a nonviolent pastor 8 weeks in maximum security with murderers. I've never heard of that.
Well, this is the ideology of Jason Kenney's government right now in the UCP, is that if you violate one of these unconstitutional health orders, that you are just as much of a threat to society as a murderer or a rapist. That is the ideology of the government right now, and Pastor Coates is paying the price for that ideology. The silver lining on the cloud is that we do have a trial date, May 3rd to May 5th. And for the first time ever, the Alberta government, after violating our charter rights and freedoms for almost 12 months now, for the first time, the government's going to have to show the public some evidence. They're going to have to prove before the court that COVID is an unusually deadly killer, which is something they've been telling us. But I mean, Statistics Canada tells us that the death rates in Canada in 2020 were very much in line with the death rates in 2019, 2018, 2017. The government's going to have to put forward evidence to support its theory that healthy asymptomatic people are significant spreaders of the virus. They're going to have to show us the science. They can't just claim that. The government's going to have to show us the science on the PCR tests, which are unreliable, which were never intended to diagnose COVID, and which have false positive rates as high as 90%. The government's going to have to justify in court why they are choosing to rely on these PCR tests. The government's going to have to show in court that the lockdowns have actually achieved some good. Now, that's easy to claim. You hear politicians all the time telling us, well, if it wasn't for these lockdowns, way more people would have died. Well, I'm sorry, that's speculation. That's just an assertion. They're going to have to back up that assertion in court. The government's going to be having to answer for all of the lockdown harms in court. All they're doing now is kind of making some cooing, sympathetic noises about how hard this must be for people that have lost their jobs. But the government's going to have to show in court that the lockdowns are doing more good than harm. So the silver lining on the cloud is that because of the suffering of Pastor Coates, the government's going to be forced to show the public the science and the evidence for the first time ever. Because all we've had in the last 12 months is fear-mongering and speculation and assertions. And the government doesn't have the evidence, and they're going to have to scramble hard in the next 2 months to come up with it.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if I would have the toughness and the courage to go to jail for something I believe in. I mean, I've never done a criminal thing in my life. I wouldn't go to jail as a criminal. I would go to jail for some political crime. And I've never been arrested at all, but occasionally I think, would I have the courage, and would my family support me and my friends and would our business continue? And in my mind, I've always thought, okay, I'm in jail overnight or something. I can't imagine 10, 11 weeks in that place. I just can't imagine that suffering.
Pastor Coates, this is tremendous courage. I asked myself the same question, because I think it's highly unlikely that I would ever be in jail for committing a criminal offense. But I do sometimes ask myself the question, would I be willing to go to jail for exercising my charter freedoms of speech and expression and religion and conscience and association and peaceful assembly? I would hope that I would have the same courage that Pastor Coates is currently displaying, and that he's displaying every day. Yeah. He can get out of jail on a moment's notice if he's willing to violate his conscience and comply with unscientific and unconstitutional health orders. I would only hope that I would have the courage that he is displaying currently. If ever it came to that for myself, I would only hope that I would have that level of courage.
Yeah, it's extremely rare, and yet it may be the thing that turns the tide for us. Let me speed up with my questions, and I know I'm asking you some philosophical questions, and you're answering very thoughtfully. Now, when I was talking to Sheila Gunn-Reid a moment ago, I put something to her and she agreed with me, but I want to check with you because you're a lawyer closely working on this case. It's my understanding that the charges or the offenses against this pastor are basically public health orders for which the penalty could be a fine, but not a criminal conviction certainly, and not jail time. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because the point I take from that is he's serving 10 weeks hard time in a maximum security prison for an offense that's akin to a speeding ticket. You're not going to go to jail for it even if you're convicted. So we're holding a guy in prison until his trial, and even if he loses his trial in the worst way possible, he wouldn't be going to prison then. Am I right, or have I mistaken the law there?
My understanding is that Pastor Coates would not go to prison unless he was found in contempt of court. And so if the Alberta government sought a specific injunction against Grace Life Church in Edmonton, then and was successful, and if there was a specific court injunction against that church, and if Pastor Coates or other members of that church then defied the injunction, they could be found to be in contempt of court.
But the actual health offense does not contemplate.
The actual health offense, my understanding is there's no jail time for that.
So he's doing 10 weeks in maximum security, being held for a trial, that on the substance he couldn't be jailed for 1 day.
That seems to be the case. Yeah, no. And if I hear otherwise, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, let me
right
know.
away. That's my understanding, is that there's no jail time as penalty for violating this these unscientific and unconstitutional public health orders.
Let me ask you about something that Sheila and I were talking about. It's been a long time since I practiced law, but bail, the law of bail, is not that complicated. Basically, there's two grounds. I mean, you practice law every day. The first is, are you a flight risk? Are you going to show up for your trial? So a pastor with roots in the community, with a family, he's not flying off to Venezuela. So there's no flight risk. This guy's going to show up, obviously. And
he's fully committed. He's fully committed to showing up for trial.
Yeah, it would be absurd to say otherwise.
Nobody. The Crown is not even alleging that. That there's any chance that he's not going to show up for his trial.
So the second ground is danger to the community. And that typically means danger of violence. So that's why you would keep a terrorist or a murderer or a rapist in jail, because you're actually worried that they'll do something violent. Obviously, there's no violence from this man. It would be a stretch to say the danger is, public, because he's not infected himself. He's not like Typhoid Mary. And here's the kicker. His church is opening without him. In fact, his church is opening in solidarity with him. We've had Sheila Gunn Reid there the last couple of weekends documenting it. Church is packed. So whether he's released or not, that church is packed. It's not correlated to whether or not he's released. In fact, it might even be a reverse correlation. They're there because he's in jail. So what exactly is the danger? So on the first grounds, flight risk, there is none, and you're saying the Crown, Karen Thorsrud, doesn't even say there's a risk. On the second grounds, danger, obviously he's not a danger of violence. The only danger I could possibly think of is they would say he would make a health danger by having the full church, but that doesn't turn on whether or not he's released, because they're open anyways. How does that make sense?
No, Ezra, I cannot disagree with your reasoning. I mean, if this was really So we've got two things at play. One is we've got the ideology of Jason Kenney, as well as Rachel Notley. I mean, the UCP and the NDP, they're both pro-lockdown parties. So we've got an ideology here that says that a full church is as much of a threat to the public as murderers that are on the loose. But then we also have and I don't want to tempt the powers that be, but you've got an inconsistent application of that ideology insofar as if Sheila Gunn Reid has been at the church and the church is packed, then logically the government should send in 1,000 police officers and just arrest everybody there. And I don't know if Jason Kenney's willing to go that far, but there's certainly an inconsistency here that I haven't been at the church. I'm in Calgary, a 3-hour drive away. But if you tell me that Sheila Gunn Reid has been there and it's packed, and I take that to be true, then you've got supposedly this big public health risk that is continuing. So it's just disgraceful. This is the consequence of people blindly accepting whatever politicians tell them, and just blindly grasping for this illusion of safety, when the hard data, the Alberta Health Services data, Statistics Canada data, tells us that COVID is not an unusually deadly killer, and it's not something that everybody should be afraid of. And it would just make far more sense to protect the vulnerable, which is, if you're 82 years old and you're sick and you're elderly and you're in a nursing home and you already have cancer, emphysema, heart disease, what have you, then those are the people that we should be protecting. But to violate our human dignity and our human rights and our fundamental freedoms by not being allowed to have your parents over for Christmas dinner, it's just it's just appalling. And things will get worse as long as the public is complacent and continues to buy into this fear mongering that is just not grounded on facts.
Yeah. I know you've got to go at the top of the hour, so we only have is that right? You've got to go, you've got a hard exit.
I've got until 11, yeah.
Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes and I'll be judicious with our time. Sheila and I talked about the disgrace of Karen Thorsrud, the prosecutor, trying to hide her name from the public yesterday, pretending that she's been under threat by these little lambs at the church. I think that's patently absurd on the face of it. If it is in fact true, well then send those threats to the police. They certainly seem to be eager to enforce them brutally. Maybe Pastor Coates will have some roommates. I don't believe it for a second. I think that you have a prosecutor who realizes she's doing something contrary to the public interest. And as I said earlier, bringing the administration of justice into disrepute. And so naturally she wants to hide her name. And she also wants to play the victim because the whole world sees that she's actually the persecutor. So the fact that Karen Thorsrud wants to hide her name is contrary to our nature and law, and I'm going to shout her name to the rafters. But I also must note, John, that we do not have independent prosecutor, advocate, one-man shows. Like some European jurisdictions have strange sort of independent roving prosecutors with no checks and balances on them. You could even say the American special prosecutor system allows that. But Karen Thorsrud has a boss, and her boss has a boss. Casey Madhu, the Justice Minister, Jason Kenney, the Premier. I believe that Cabinet and Caucus both discussed this matter. At what point do they say, drop this? Can they say, drop this? Do they have the legal power to say, drop this? This is contrary to law, contrary to the Constitution. How can we get what is clearly a political prosecution to be stopped?
It's a good question, and I dearly want to see Pastor Coates released from jail as soon as possible, and he should never have been jailed in the first place. It is a thorny and challenging question that you ask, because one of the aspects of the rule of law is that politicians, the politically elected people, do not interfere in prosecutions. And the whole country was looking at this issue a year and a half ago with Prime Minister Trudeau interfering with Jody Raymond Wilson. I'm sorry if I've got her
Jody
name
Wilson
wrong.
Raybould, in the SNC Lavalin matter. You bet Trudeau was trying to get his friends off the hook. Clearly corrupt, but he was doing it in a sneaky way. This is the opposite. This is a public interest, and it would be a public explanation. This wouldn't be, hey, psst, let my rich friends at SNC Lavalin go from their corruption case. This is a public statement. Whoa, this is contrary to public. It's the same question of political interference, but that was interfering to let a genuine confessed criminal organization go. I mean, SNC Lavalin confessed to crimes. The question was, do they get a plea bargain or not? This is a man who has been charged with no crime and is being persecuted in a manner no one's ever heard of before. I think it's the same issue, but opposite sides of the spectrum of right and wrong.
Well, I'm totally sympathetic to what you're saying. And like I said, I'd like to see him get out of jail. But we do have to ask ourselves, do we want a country or a province, in this case, where the elected officials are, interfering with who gets prosecuted, who does not get prosecuted, who gets put in jail, who does not get put in jail. So it's kind of scary territory. I will say about Karen Thorsrud, though, that perhaps she believes sincerely that she is doing the right thing. I try to not, go into people's hearts and minds, and I assume that people they have good motives. They're doing what they believe to be right. But what I think is incredibly slimy is for her to pretend that somehow her safety is at risk. And I would love it if she, if that is the case, she should put an affidavit in the court, and she should have, transcripts of the death threats, if any, or she should have, the threatening emails or notes or this or that, because Pastor Coates is 100% peaceful, 100% nonviolent. The members of his congregation are peaceful and nonviolent. His wife was interviewed last night by Danielle Smith, and she said that she's very sad and heartbroken by being separated from her husband, and at the same time she accepts that this is reality. So this is not a biker gang or some criminal operation. And it's interesting because when you do get trials before the court where there's a prosecutor who's going after a biker gang or some criminal activity, in those scenarios, the prosecutor wears it as a badge of honor that his or her name is publicly known. So for Karen Thorsrud to be wanting her name not mentioned on court documents, to me it seems very slimy, unless she did in fact unless there is in fact a real threat to her danger and to her life or to her safety, in which case she should swear to an affidavit and file the affidavit with the courts, and she should report matters to police. But just to insinuate this is a slur against James Coates, what she did in court yesterday, I think.
Yeah. Well, I know you got to go, but I have reviewed that version of that section of the criminal code that allows any justice system participant to be secret, and you have to have a written application. There's about 10 conditions. The judge has to balance the public interest of society and other measures to protect. What happened yesterday wasn't just slimy innately, but the process of it was clearly contrary to the law. I think Karen Thorsrud knows deep down inside that what she is doing is contrary to the nature of Canada and Canadians. And you know what? You're a public person prosecuting in the name of the Queen. You own it. And if you don't like it, quit and be rid of your disgraceful job. No one's forcing her to put pastors in jail. Anyways, John, it's great to have you. Thank you for joining us. I know you've got to go right now, so we'll say goodbye. I want to give a shout out to your website, jccf.ca. Stands for Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, jccf.ca. Folks can chip in. You actually get a charity tax credit because these guys are a registered civil liberties public interest law firm. So feel free to chip in if you want to help John and his team fight for Pastor Coates. That's what the website looks like. There you get tax receipts. It's the whole meal deal. John, great to see you again. Good luck out there.
Good to see you.
If you'd like to show support for religious freedom and for the folks here at Grace Life to worship as they see fit, and to send a message to the provincial government that locking up pastors is an un-Canadian and authoritarian thing to do, please consider signing and sharing our petition at freepastorjames.com.